A ruthless mafia boss humiliated a heavily overweight waitress in front of the city's elite, expecting her to crumble in tears. Instead, she locked eyes with him and whispered a single sentence that made the deadliest men in the room freeze. What she said unlocked a 10-year-old secret that changed everything. Rush Street in Chicago is a place where money screams and power whispers. Inside Toscana Prime, an ultra-exclusive Italian steakhouse frequented by politicians, celebrities, and the men who secretly run the city, perfection was the baseline. The floors were imported, Carrara marble, the chandeliers dripping in Austrian crystal, and the waitstaff were typically aspiring models. Then there was Penelope Gallagher. Penny, as her name tag read, was 32, exhausted, and carrying an extra 130 pounds on her 5'4" frame. To the wealthy patrons of Toscana Prime, she wasn't a person. She was part of the furniture, an invisible sweating entity whose only purpose was to keep their crystal water glasses full. Her uniform, a crisp black button-down, and tailored slacks strained against her heavy curves. By 9 p.m. on a Friday, her plantar fasciitis was screaming her thighs, chafed painfully, and a thin sheen of sweat clung to her forehead. She knew what the patrons whispered about her. She saw the sneers from the impeccably thin wives of Cook County judges and the outright disgusted glances from the sharply dressed businessmen. Why is someone her size working here, their eyes said. She ruins the aesthetic. But Penny needed the job. She needed the cash tips that slipped under the table, the kind of untraceable money that kept her hidden. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted violently at 9:15 p.m. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as the heavy mahogany double doors swung open. The maître d' practically tripped over his own feet, rushing forward, his face pale. Leo Moretti had arrived. At 34, Leo was the undisputed head of the Moretti crime syndicate. He had taken over the family 10 years ago, after the unsolved murder of his father, Don Giovanni. Leo was a terrifyingly handsome man, carved out of granite and expensive cologne, wearing a custom charcoal Brioni suit that clung to his broad shoulders. He radiated a cold, lethal energy. Flanking him were his top capos, Dante Rossi, and Tommy the Bat Lucchese men, who were known to make bodies disappear into Lake Michigan before breakfast. They bypassed the host stand entirely and moved straight to the elevated VIP booth in the back, a table that was permanently reserved for the Moretti family. Penny was assigned to the section. Her manager, a nervous, balding man named Richard, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "Do not mess this up, Penny. Don't look him in the eye. Speak only when spoken to. If you ruin this, you're fired before you even hit the kitchen doors." Penny nodded, her jaw tight. She grabbed a fresh bottle of a 2010 Kymus Special Selection Cabernet, an $800 bottle, and made her way toward the booth. Her heart pounded a dull, heavy rhythm in her chest. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, focusing on placing one aching foot in front of the other. At the table, Leo was furious. He was in the middle of a heated, hushed conversation with Dante about a shipment seized at the port of Chicago. His deep, gravelly voice vibrated with a dangerous edge. "I told the Morabito crew they had until midnight." Leo snarled, slamming his fist lightly on the table, making the silverware jump. "If the money isn't in the offshore account by 12:01, I want their warehouse burned to the ash. Do you understand me?" "Crystal clear, boss," Dante replied, shifting his heavy frame. Penny approached, her hands trembling slightly. She uncorked the heavy bottle with practiced, albeit clumsy precision. She stepped forward to pour Leo's glass first, as was customary. But as she leaned in, Tommy Lucchese suddenly shifted his chair backward to let a passing busboy through. The heavy oak chair slammed hard into Penny's wide hip. She lost her balance. Her heavy frame pitched forward, her orthotic shoes slipping on the polished marble. She desperately tried to right herself, but gravity and exhaustion betrayed her. The heavy glass bottle slipped from her grip. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The dark crimson Cabernet cascaded directly onto Leo Moretti's chest, soaking his crisp white silk shirt and pooling into the lap of his thousands of dollars suit. The glass bottle shattered against the edge of the table, sending shards flying across the pristine, white tablecloth. Silence fell over Toscana Prime. It wasn't just quiet. It was the suffocating, terrifying stillness of a graveyard. The clinking of forks stopped. The soft jazz playing over the speakers felt suddenly deafening. Leo Moretti sat perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds. He looked down at his ruined suit, the blood-red wine dripping onto his Italian leather shoes. Then he slowly raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto Penny. Penny was frozen, her chest heaving, her round face flushed a deep, mortified crimson. She tried to speak, to apologize, but her throat clamped shut. Leo stood up. He towered over her, radiating a murderous aura. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the dead, silent dining room. Penny kept her eyes down, terrified. "I said, look at me." Leo roared, his voice exploding like a gunshot. Several patrons flinched. Penny slowly lifted her chin. "Are you stupid or just completely blind?" Leo sneered, stepping closer. He looked her up and down with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Look at you. You are a clumsy, pathetic mess. You waddle over here, sweating like a pig in a slaughterhouse, and you dump a bottle of wine on me, who hired this fat, incompetent cow. You belong in a diner, slinging hash browns, not serving civilized people." Tears pricked the corners of Penny's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She was used to the insults. She had heard them all. Fat, lazy, disgusting. But hearing them from him, it cracked something open deep inside her chest. A vault she had kept welded shut for 10 brutal years. Dante stepped forward, reaching inside his tailored jacket, his hand resting on the grip of his concealed firearm. "I'll handle her, Leo. Let's get you cleaned up." "No!" Leo snapped his eyes, still boring into Penny's. "I want her on her knees, cleaning this off my shoes with her bare hands. Now." Penny didn't move. The fear that had been paralyzing her suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, ancient steel. The heavy, exhausted waitress disappeared, and for a fraction of a second, her posture shifted perfectly into that of a soldier. She looked past the designer suit, past the terrifying reputation, straight into the soul of the man standing before her. Penny took a single breath, leaned in slightly, and spoke in a steady, chillingly calm voice that echoed through the silent room. "You scream exactly like your father did, Leo. Right before I put a bullet in his head to save your life." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if time itself had stopped. Behind, Leo, Dante, and Tommy drew their weapons instantly. The sharp, metallic clack-clack of gun hammers being pulled back echoed through the high-end restaurant. Across the room, 2 of Leo's plainclothes guards at the bar leaped to their feet, their hands in their jackets. "Take her outside," Dante growled, aiming his weapon directly at Penny's broad chest. "Now!" But Leo didn't move. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a marble statue. His breathing hitched shallow and erratic. His dark eyes widened, staring at the heavy woman standing before him. Only 2 people in the world knew how Don Giovanni had actually died in the basement of that West Loop warehouse 10 years ago. Leo, and the woman who had pulled the trigger. The woman who had shoved Leo out of the way of his father's drunken, murderous rage, shot the Don, and then fled into the night. The woman who 3 days later was blown to pieces in a rigged car bomb, meant to erase the only witness. "Stand down," Leo whispered. Boss, she just threatened. Dante started. I said, stand the fuck down. Leo roared, his voice cracking with an emotion none of his men had ever heard from him. Panic. The guns slowly lowered, though the tension remained thick enough to choke on. The surrounding patrons were paralyzed, terrified witnesses to a mafia meltdown. Leo took a slow, agonizing step toward the waitress. His eyes frantically scanned her face. It didn't make sense. The woman in his memories, the ghost that haunted his nightmares, the only woman he had ever loved, was petite, with wild auburn curls and sharp cheekbones. Penelope Hayes had been quick, fiery, and beautiful. The woman standing in front of him was heavy, her face rounded and swollen, her hair a dull, mousy brown, pulled back into a tight, frizzy bun. She looked tired, aged far beyond her 32 years. There was no resemblance, until he looked at her eyes. Beneath the puffy eyelids, staring back at him with fierce defiance, were striking emerald-green eyes with a distinct tiny fleck of gold in the left iris. Leo's legs nearly gave out. He stumbled forward, bracing his hands heavily on the edge of the table. He didn't care about the spilled wine, the ruined suit, or the audience of Chicago's elite watching his unraveling. Penny, he choked out the name, tearing from his throat like it was lined with glass. Penelope! Penny swallowed hard, the tough facade cracking as her eyes filled with tears. Hello, little lion, she whispered, using the private nickname she hadn't spoken in a decade. Leo let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. He turned violently to his men. Get everyone out. Clear the restaurant. Shut the doors, pull the blinds, and if anyone looks through the glass, shoot them. Chaos erupted. Dante and Tommy began barking orders, practically shoving the wealthy patrons, judges, and socialites out the front doors. Move, leave your meals out now. Plates, shattered chairs screeched against the marble floors, and within 3 minutes, Toscana Prime was completely empty, save for Leo, Penny, and the armed guard securing the perimeter outside. Leo stepped over the shattered wine bottle, closing the distance between them. He raised a shaking hand, hovering it an inch from her cheek, terrified that if he touched her, she would vanish into smoke. They told me you burned. He wept, the ruthless boss, dissolving into a broken boy. Uncle Carmine brought me your necklace from the wreckage. I buried an empty casket, Penny. I buried my fucking heart in that grave. Penny let out a bitter, wet laugh, stepping back slightly to avoid his touch. She crossed her thick arms over her chest, suddenly intensely aware of her size, of how repulsive she must look to a man who could have any supermodel in the city. I did burn Leo, she said, her voice shaking. She reached up and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her uniform collar, pulling the fabric aside to reveal thick, jagged, raised burn scars that crawled up her collarbone and disappeared down her chest. Leo gasped his hand, covering his mouth. The blast threw me from the car before the flames took it. Penny explained the memories, making her voice hollow. I woke up in a charity hospital in Gary, Indiana. 3 broken ribs, 3rd degree, burns, a shattered femur, and a fractured skull. But the worst part was the shrapnel. She pointed a trembling finger at her throat. A piece of the dashboard tore right through here. It completely destroyed my thyroid gland. Leo stared at her, tears streaming down his face, completely oblivious to his ruined, wine-soaked clothes. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you come back to me? I would have torn the world apart for you. I would have sent you to the best doctors. And then what, Leo? Penny yelled, the anger finally boiling over. Come back to the family that tried to murder me. Do you think your father's loyalists were just going to let the girl who killed the Don walk back into the fold? Do you think your Uncle Carmine wanted me alive? Carmine is dead, Leo said fiercely. I put him in the ground 5 years ago for conspiring against me. If I had known he ordered the hit on you. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. I would have kept him alive for months just to torture him. Penny looked away, shame flushing her heavy cheeks. I didn't come back because... Look at me, Leo. She gestured to her body. I spent 2 years in a hospital bed. They pumped me full of synthetic hormones, high-dose steroids, to keep my brain from swelling, and medications that wrecked my metabolism. Between the destroyed thyroid and the steroids, I gained 80 pounds in the first year. Without money, without physical therapy, I was crippled, depressed, and hiding in cheap motels, eating whatever I could afford. I went from the girl you loved to this. She gestured to herself, her voice breaking. A fat, sweaty joke that you just humiliated in front of half the city. No, Leo said, his voice dropping to a fierce, desperate whisper. He closed the gap between them, ignoring her flinch. He grabbed her thick waist, pulling her heavy frame flush against his chest, ruining her uniform with the spilled wine from his suit. No, don't you ever say that. He brought his hands up, cupping her face, his thumbs gently wiping the tears from her flushed cheeks. He didn't see the double chin or the frizzy hair. He only saw the fierce, beautiful girl who had saved his life. You are a queen, Leo vowed, leaning his forehead against hers. You took my bullets. You carried my sins. I don't care if you weigh 500 pounds or carry 100 scars. You are Penelope. You are mine. And I will spend the rest of my life on my knees, making up for what I said to you tonight. Penny squeezed her eyes shut, leaning into his warmth for the first time in 10 years. But her heart hammered with a new, terrifying dread. She opened her eyes, pulling back just enough to look into his dark, devoted gaze. Leo, she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the second secret she had carried. There's another reason I couldn't come back. Something the doctors found when they operated on me after the explosion. Leo frowned, his hands tightening protectively on her shoulders. What is it? Penny, whatever it is, I can fix it. Penny shook her head, slowly stepping out of his embrace. You can't fix this, Leo, because he's currently sitting in a rundown apartment in the South Side, wondering why his mother isn't home from her shift yet. Leo froze. The blood roared in his ears. His name is Matteo. Penny said, the tears finally spilling over. He has your dark hair and your father's temper. He's 9 years old, Leo. The word hung in the air heavier than the suffocating silence of the empty restaurant. Matteo. Leo staggered backward, hitting the edge of the mahogany table. The crystal glasses rattled. He brought a trembling hand to his mouth, his dark eyes locked on Penny, searching for any sign of deceit. But he knew her. Even buried beneath 10 years of pain scars and the physical toll of her trauma, he knew her soul. She would never lie about this. A son. Leo breathed the syllables foreign on his tongue. I have a son. He turns 10 in October, Penny said, wrapping her arms around her thick waist, suddenly feeling violently exposed. He's brilliant, Leo. He loves math. He's fiercely protective, and he has this temper. God, he has your temper. When he gets angry, his eyes go completely black, just like yours. Leo's chest heaved. A volatile mixture of overwhelming joy, crushing guilt, and pure, unadulterated rage flooded his veins. He had missed his child's first steps, his first words, while Leo had been sitting in a velvet-lined mansion, drowning in scotch and mourning a ghost. His true love had been crippled, starving, and raising the heir to the Moretti Empire in a South Side slum. Dante! Leo roared. The dining room doors burst open instantly. Dante and Tommy rushed in, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning for threats. Bring the armored Maybach to the alley door, Leo commanded, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, absolute authority. "We are leaving. Now, boss the Morabito crew," Dante started. "Fuck the Morabitos. If they haven't paid by midnight, burn their warehouse to the ground and shoot anyone who runs out. My priorities have changed." Leo turned to Penny, his expression softening only for her. "Take me to him. Take me to my son." 10 minutes later, Penny found herself sinking into the buttery leather seats of Leo's heavily armored luxury SUV. The contrast between her cheap wine-stained uniform and the opulent interior of the vehicle made her stomach churn. Leo sat beside her, his large, calloused hand gripping hers so tightly she thought her bones might bruise. He refused to let her go. As the convoy of black SUVs navigated the glittering downtown streets and crossed into the gritty, neglected neighborhoods of the South Side, Leo's jaw locked tighter and tighter. They pulled up to a decaying brick apartment building where half the streetlights were shot out. A neon liquor store sign buzzed aggressively across the street. "You lived here?" Leo whispered, staring out the bulletproof glass at the graffiti-covered walls. "My family lived here. It was what I could afford on a waitress's salary," Penny said quietly, shrinking back into the seat. "No background checks, no questions asked. Never again." Leo swore his voice, a low, dangerous rumble. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You will never walk these streets again." Leo ordered Dante and Tommy to secure the perimeter and followed Penny up 3 flights of stairs that smelled of stale cigarettes and damp rot. Penny unlocked the battered wooden door of apartment 3B. Inside the apartment was tiny, but immaculately clean. A small box TV was playing a baseball game on low volume. Curled up on a faded, lumpy thrift store sofa was a boy. At the sound of the deadbolt sliding back, the boy sat up instantly. Leo stopped breathing. "Mom!" Matteo stood up, stepping between the door and the tiny kitchen, instinctively placing himself in front of his mother. His eyes darted to Leo. "Who is this? Why is he covered in blood?" "It's just wine, Matty," Penny said softly, her voice cracking. She walked forward and knelt despite the agonizing pain in her knees, wrapping her heavy arms around her son's small shoulders. "It's okay. We're safe." Leo couldn't move. He was looking at a ghost. Matteo was the exact mirror image of Leo at 9 years old. The same sharp jaw, the same brooding brow, the same intense, calculating stare. Slowly, Leo dropped to his knees on the cheap linoleum floor, uncaring about his ruined designer suit. He looked at the boy, tears freely tracking down his hardened face. "Hello, Matteo," Leo choked out. Matteo frowned, his young face hardening. He looked at his mother, then back at the stranger. "Why is he crying, Mom?" "Because," Leo answered before Penny could, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I've been looking for you for a very, very long time. I'm your—" Before the word father could leave his lips, the apartment window shattered inward. Glass exploded across the tiny living room like a shower of diamonds. Crack, crack. The distinct suppressed cough of automatic rifle fire tore through the drywall. "Down!" Leo roared. Decades of ruthless survival instincts kicked in instantly. He lunged forward, tackling Penny and Matteo to the floor, using his massive muscular frame to shield them from the barrage of bullets ripping through the cheap plaster. Down on the street, chaos erupted. The Morabito crew had not waited for midnight, realizing Leo had cleared out Toscana Prime and left himself exposed with only 2 capos they had tracked, the convoy seizing the opportunity to decapitate the Moretti family in a slum where the cops wouldn't arrive for at least 20 minutes. "Dante Sitrep!" Leo barked into his 2-way radio earpiece, rolling off Penny and drawing his heavy Glock 19. "Ambush, boss." 3 SUVs heavily armed. Dante's voice crackled, backed by the deafening sound of return fire. They've got the front entrance pinned. We're holding them back, but they've sent 2 men up the fire escape. The kitchen window! Penny yelled over the gunfire. Leo spun toward the small kitchen, raising his weapon just as the heavy steel toe of a combat boot kicked in the window frame. A masked man squeezed through, raising a sawed-off shotgun. Leo fired twice. The hollow-point bullets took the man in the chest, throwing him backward out the window and down into the alley. But a second man had already breached the front door, kicking it off its weak hinges. He swung an automatic submachine gun directly toward Leo's back. Leo was turning, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Suddenly, a heavy cast-iron skillet slammed brutally into the side of the gunman's head. Penny, panting heavily, her face flushed with adrenaline, stood beside the ruined door. She had crawled to the stove and used her physical weight to swing the heavy pan with bone-crushing force. The gunman collapsed his weapon, clattering across the linoleum. Without missing a beat, Penny dropped the pan, snatched the submachine gun off the floor, racked the bolt and aimed it down the hallway, her stance wide, her green eyes blazing with the same lethal fire that had saved Leo 10 years ago. "I didn't survive a car bomb just to die in a cheap apartment," she snarled. Leo stared at her, awe and pure, undeniable lust mixing with the adrenaline. She was magnificent. Her uniform was torn, her hair was a wild mess, she was heavily overweight, and yet to Leo Moretti, she was the most terrifyingly beautiful creature on earth. She was his queen. "Hold the hall," Leo commanded, grabbing the radio. "Dante, bring the car to the alley door. We are coming down the back stairs." It took 5 bloody, deafening minutes. With Penny covering the rear and Leo clearing the path, they navigated the dark, cramped stairwell, stepping over the bodies of Morabito hitmen. Matteo was tucked firmly under Leo's left arm, his face hidden against his father's chest. The boy didn't cry once. When they burst through the rusted alley door, Dante was waiting. The Maybach's armored door swung wide. They piled in, as Tommy laid down a suppressing fire with an assault rifle, turning the alley into a war zone. "Drive!" Leo roared as the heavy doors slammed shut. The massive engine roared, the tires screaming against the asphalt as the armored vehicle tore out of the south side, leaving the burning wreckage of the Morabito crew in their rear-view mirror. As the adrenaline began to fade, the interior of the SUV fell quiet, save for the heavy breathing of its occupants. Matteo pulled his face away from Leo's chest. He looked at the gun in Leo's hand, then at his mother, who was still clutching the stolen submachine gun. "Mom, Matteo," said, his voice remarkably steady for a 9-year-old who had just survived a shootout. "Who is this guy?" Leo unclipped his empty magazine, setting the weapon aside. He looked at Penny, silently asking for permission. She gave him a slow, tearful nod. "I'm Leo Moretti," he said, looking his son in the eyes. "And I am your father. I am so sorry I wasn't there. But I swear on my life, no one will ever touch you or your mother again." Matteo stared at him, processing the information with a cold, calculating logic that made Leo's chest swell with terrifying pride. The boy finally nodded. "Good. Because our apartment sucked." Penny let out a startled, wet laugh, covering her mouth. Leo threw his head back and laughed, a deep, booming sound that Dante and Tommy had not heard in a decade. 2 months later, the sprawling Moretti estate on Lake Forest was a fortress of limestone, wrought iron, and heavy security. Inside the grand dining room, a lavish feast was laid out on a massive mahogany table. Leo sat at the head, nursing a glass of bourbon. To his right, young Matteo was intensely focused on a chessboard, playing against Dante, who looked visibly stressed as the 9-year-old systematically dismantled his defense. The heavy double doors opened, and the room fell silent. Penny walked in. She had not lost a single pound. She was still a heavy, thick woman, her curves unapologetic and prominent. But the exhausted, hunched waitress was gone. In her place stood the undisputed queen of the Chicago underworld. She wore a custom-tailored emerald green silk dress that draped elegantly over her wide hips and heavy chest. Her mousy hair had been treated and styled into luxurious auburn waves that cascaded down her shoulders, deliberately swept to the side to reveal the thick, jagged burn scars on her collarbone scars. She refused to hide, wearing them as badges of honor. Around her neck sat a staggering 50-carat diamond necklace. She commanded the room. Leo stood up instantly, pulling out the chair to his left. His eyes devoured her, filled with absolute, unwavering worship. As she sat, Leo leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the scarred skin of her neck, right over her pulse. "You look breathtaking, Mia Regina," he murmured, his voice rough. Penny smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up her emerald eyes. She placed her hand over his. "And you look like a man who finally has his house in order, little lion." Across the table, Dante surrendered his king to Matteo with a heavy sigh. "The kid is ruthless, boss." Leo smirked, pouring Penny a glass of the very same 2010 Camus Cabernet she had spilled on him 2 months prior. "Of course he is," Leo said, raising his glass in a toast to the woman beside him. "He takes after his mother." What a heart-stopping journey, from an invisible, humiliated waitress to the fierce queen of the Chicago underworld. Penny proved true strength outshines any superficial standard. Leo not only reclaimed his fiercely loyal love, but also discovered a brilliant, ruthless heir in young Matteo, completely shifting the Mafia's power dynamic. If this intense tale of explosive secret survival and undeniable romance kept you captivated, smash that like button, share with fellow drama lovers, and subscribe for more thrilling stories or